Hello and a warm Collisions YYC. Welcome to my guest this morning, Mr. Demian Newman. How you doing, Demian?
I'm fantastic, Tyler. How are you?
I'm awesome, man. Thanks for coming on the show. Calgary conspires, 1 degree, 2 degree, 1 degree of separation. We got introduced, and I'm really curious. We had a great coffee. We chatted. We sat on a beautiful patio and had a coffee chat about what you do as the founder of the CEO and the founder at GreenWorks ESG. It's a big, hairy acronym that's out there all the time, and we're all getting hit with it. I love to dive in. Tell us a little bit. What is GreenWorks ESG all about? Let us in the tent. What do you do? Who are you? What role do you live in the world? And then let's get into this. I'm going to boldly say juicy topic.
Very juicy topic. Thanks, Tyler. I really appreciate you having me on the podcast. So maybe probably the easiest way to do it is just a little bit of a look back on the last 4 years. I was not in ESG or sustainability. I didn't even know what ESG was 5 years ago. And I was actually oil and gas sales and marketing for service companies to oil companies, a lot in the environmental space, and was just seeing so much incredible progress on innovation technology that was reducing the environmental footprint for these oil companies through these different service companies. And it's just baffling to me that none of this would make it to the corporate reports, or the industry overall was not talking about all these great achievements as an industry. And as I was kind of dealing with that frustration, I just saw all this news about ESG, and it was blowing up, and it went from 10% of companies were doing sustainability reports to 90%, and it was going from it's now this $40 trillion industry. And I actually thought in the moment 4.5 years ago, this is the best thing that could happen to responsible companies and responsible countries and responsible industries, and knowing the rigor and the requirements put on industries like oil and gas and mining in Canada, and what they had to do to just stay compliant for regulatory compliance. And I'm like, they've got the data already. Now we can actually take this and put it into an ESG sustainability report. This is the best thing that could happen to them. And I still believe that. The big difference in the last 4 years is now, as we are on the precipice of mandatory reporting, and seeing that this is going to be pushed down, not just to publicly traded companies, but all companies. And we can talk about why that's going to be pushed down to all companies, is how can we have something in place where we help every size company be able to manage this with accurate, credible data. And so that's what we built at GreenWorks. We built a software solution that helps the bigger companies that are well established and really streamline the reporting process, but also the small mom and pop site companies that just need to get going and need a starter kit to be able to help them navigate this as they get it pushed down on them from a bunch of different angles.
That was, I feel you've been in this elevator before, for this elevator ride of, hey, what are you doing? Who are you? And what problem you solving?
Once or twice.
Yeah, we went a couple floors, but it was, I want to, before I move into so many things about the future and accessibility and standardization and some of the parallels with maybe financial reporting and other things, with whether you're big or you're small, your financial reporting needs to meet a certain standards, which you and I have kind of talked offline that maybe that's where this is headed. But talk to me a little bit about, just because of my own curiosities, and I've encountered this living in Alberta and having family in Quebec and Ontario, all the things that the energy sector was doing, but the naysayers would roll their eyes at you, even saying like, oh, they were doing all these great things. Yeah, whatever. That's what you all say. You were killing babies and terrorizing the environment. But yet I've seen my wife very much more casually and quietly than I would at a dinner table go, well, actually, let me walk you through what we're doing. But the outside narrative around that, when it comes to specifically oil and gas in Alberta, we've been so poor at telling that story. And hearing you say like, yeah, it was happening at the front line. It was happening like service companies, smaller, nimble, servicing in these solutions, but it never kind of quote unquote saw the light of day just talk to me, your own perspective of that. We created some of our own challenges, I guess is what I'm saying, by not being better at telling that story when we were indeed, I believe, doing a lot of positive things.
Well, I think it's the easiest way to summarize it specific to industries that are under the microscope, like oil and gas and mining, is that we work with, at GreenWorks ESG, we work with companies in all industries, all countries. Effectively, the easiest way to separate those industries, oil and gas and mining, is that they have 10,000 more data points than go into their actual ESG report. We actually have to pare it down. And it is literally like 1,000 to 1 in terms of the
because of how much data they're actually collecting and what they're
already
doing.
And they have been for years, and they've been required to for years. So think of things like emissions and the political rhetoric around emissions. Oil and gas companies, all the producers, all the midstream companies, they've been doing this for years anyway. Now it's just the ability for them to put in a report, have a roll-up number, but then say to every industry, every country, well, we're already doing it. Here's our number. And we actually have backing data that has, again, thousands of data points right down to the smallest little widget in the field that's collecting data. Where's your data? And be able to standardize that globally. I don't think that's a bad thing if
Right.
everyone is asked of the same thing that these industries are asked of.
And to your point about, a lot of companies have been doing this. They've been doing it for a lot of years, but there still is that for versus against. And you and I were joking about that earlier about, the polarization that exists. And like, if you're pro energy, you must be anti-environment. If you're pro environment, if you believe in global warming, you don't believe in this, and all this back and forth. But nothing slices through that, like some data that is actually universally acceptable and standardized. It's like, oh, those financials, you just made those up. Well, no, I actually followed a certain standard. And something you said when we had coffee has stuck with me about the standardization of so much that we now are able to trust as investors, as anyone involved in the financial side of things. Is that where we're headed, to that same degree? If you can't just dismiss it because you don't want to believe in what someone's doing, that the actual standardization is going to eliminate maybe some of that.
Standardization is going to help it immensely, and standardizing it in the same way that one of my favorite lines is, no CFO would ever look at a financial report and go, that's good enough. But that's what companies have been doing for ESG reporting, sustainability reporting forever. Let's put out a nice fluffy story on these 3 or 4 things that we do, we're really proud of, and we'll just sweep everything else under the rug. Then ESG reporting effectively enabled companies or forced companies to show a little more, but it was still apples to oranges comparison, one report to another report.
Right.
So standardizing it across the board, across industries, in terms of what is being asked in the same way a financial report asks for it, is going to simplify all of this. But it then comes with the risk, is when you're reporting upon this, and especially when you're introducing goals and targets, is there substance within those goals and targets? And that is the tricky one that companies are trying to reckon with right now, is, with this greenwashing legal risk that is attached to a lot of this.
Yeah.
You have to be able to say what you do and do what you say. I mean, it's what our parents taught us when we were kids. If you have that same mentality, you're going to be fine. But you do need the checks and balances. And again, you can't be doing this on a spreadsheet and hope that data is accurate when you are asked to do that third-party assurance audit. Is any of this credible? And you're scrambling to figure out how it's credible. So that's really why technology is coming into play now and reducing those costs for companies, because they have to have those costs brought down because of again, the microscope that's on every single data point. And is it credible? Are those numbers real?
Mm-hmm. From a standardization perspective, like, I know provincially we have differentiate. We have north of the border, south of the border. We have Europe. What's the journey that we're on around that? It's kind of our first step of get our house in order from a Canadian wide perspective. And it's hard to think that emissions on one side of one imaginary line between one province and the next, and emissions regulations on the other, are looked at completely differently, where we're all kind of sharing the same environment. Like if you look at like the root of what we're trying to standardize, right, and why we're trying to do it, there isn't an imaginary wall anywhere.
Well, and I think this is a good segue to kind of explain where ESG overall is going, because of a lot of that, right? Is that that idea we need standardization, but we also need to avoid things like double counting and where are our emissions coming from, but not just emissions. Every aspect, every metric within ESG, whether it's water, whether it's the social side of things, and DEI, indigenous engagement, safety, cybersecurity comes up in ESG a lot. People really focus on just the E and the E within the E, the emissions within environment. But if you just take the emissions side of ESG, it's less than 10% of the total gamut of all the different metrics and frameworks that you're looking at within ESG. But the idea of standardization is really coming from, there's really 3 pillars. If you're in Canada right now, if you look at it, is you go, a lot of people right now are talking about the publicly traded companies on the TSX Venture are waiting on a comment period on mandatory reporting for them. And the IFRS, the International Standard for Finances, has stepped into the ESG game. And they announced their frameworks last summer. We're just seeing what is going to be mandatory, what is going to be voluntary for a publicly traded company in 2025.
Okay. Kind of starting at thinking of that as kind of a tier 1 situation.
Exactly. And so most people are very well aware of that. What people are less aware of is the fact that all the banks, insurance companies, and trusts in Canada are under OFSI. And so they are actually in mandatory reporting right now. And so all the banks right now in Canada have till March of 2025 to put out their first mandatory report. That's getting their house in order. The next step to that is financial emissions, which means that all of the companies they're lending capital to, they're going to need not only the emissions, but the strategy around the emissions and climate reduction. So that then effectively, if you use a bank, this is going to affect you in the next couple of years. And then the third pillar,
that report that bank has to deliver next year in March 2025, that's not about their operations. That's about everyone, because they're enabling a company by giving them funds. And if they're enabling someone who's not doing the thing, that's part of that chain of events. Like that gets very real very quickly, because your ability to get access to capital, which I know, like, let's be blunt, the energy sector, oil and gas, has had some trouble with in the last few years anyways.
Absolutely.
But this is going to go well beyond that. And it's easy to point and go, oh, oil and gas, you're bad. But this is going to affect everybody. If you're doing, like that's kind of moves away from, it was easy to make the energy sector the villain. But, and we always have room for improvement, but there's a lot of other sectors that do too. What I'm hearing you say here is it's going to stop maybe being as selective of who we point our finger at, because everyone's going to be impacted.
Well, it is really interesting, right? How they look at this, that effectively what they've said is you cannot be in business without having a bank lending you capital. So your emissions are kind of the bank's responsibility. And whether you agree or disagree with that, I don't know.
It's where it's headed. It's where it's headed.
It's where it's already, it's not even where it's headed. It's where it's at. And they're just doing it in stage. So the banks right now are getting their house in order. Next step is financial emissions. The idea that if you have a coffee shop, you couldn't be in business without that bank. So that bank is now going to ask for not only your emissions, but a strategy around reducing those emissions, because the bank now knows that though all of those customers are going to be in their ledger, and here's our emissions. So bank A has X amount of emissions for their customers, and bank B has half of that. Now that's going to be the next stage of this, is how do we get this?
Well, and I've had some guests on talking about supply chain. So that coffee shop is getting, it's not producing any of its own inputs. It's probably not growing its own beans. It probably doesn't have a plot of land somewhere that, they would grow, or the pastries that they sell, or the milk that they sell, or anything. So the reality, and I'd like the coffee shop, because you can think of the big corporate and they've got a team and they can hire people and they've got resources, but I'm a coffee shop owner. I'm the owner and I've got 4 staff. And now you want me to do what? Like, I'm already exhausted. Like there's a heaviness to that although right or wrong, there is still the burden of the day-to-day operations of a business. And it's just another friggin' thing I have to do as a business owner.
100%. And how do you do it? How do you do it off the side of your desk? How do you do it where it's got credible data and a credible strategy attached, and not spend a fortune on consultants and advisory and which your business doesn't have a line item for anyway.
Well, do I have my ESG bookkeeper now? Like, I've got my bookkeeper from my finances. Did they look at my ESG report, or do I have to hire another? Like, you can't be in business without a bookkeeper, and you shouldn't probably put all your receipts in a shoebox. We're going to stick with a coffee shop for a while. But do I then have someone else, like I have my fractional HR person, my fractional ESG expert? Like, is that where it's going to be for every size of business?
Well, and that's really why we started GreenWorks ESG. We started the software company on both. We want to help the big companies, but we really were looking at it as, we know this is going to get pushed down on the smaller companies. So how do we help them on 3 pillars? How do we help them with data management and collect accurate data? Then be able to, the second pillar is being able to write a report, take that data and then repurpose it for, your bank's asking for it, we can use it for that. Your customers are asking it, we can use it for that. Insurance companies to get a better rate, because that is also getting pushed on the insurance industry in Canada as well.
It's like, do you have a house alarm? You get this discount. If you don't, you don't. Like those kind of things, right? Yeah.
And we absolutely saw this come in the same way that no company used a software solution for payroll or accounting back in the 90s. And then all of a sudden, within 2 years, everyone had a Simply Accounting or TurboTax or something like that. That's what we're looking at on the ESG side of it. Okay. Because then the third piece of why this is affecting all Canadian companies is the federal government. So the federal government, which anti-ESG folks will say is the problem for all of it. The reality is there's only one of the 3 lanes that the federal government's really looking at, is if you want to work for the federal government. If you want to work for the federal government, they put out mandatory climate disclosures last year. So if you want to be a vendor on their list, you have to have that established as well. And then there is a lot of and there was even some new laws passed or proposed last week, where it is the risk is attached to what you disclose and what the federal government is now asking for. So there is a federal government aspect to this, but the first pillar, the TSX venture doing mandatory disclosures, the reality is the federal government has nothing to do with that, because they're just looking at the fact that right now 50% of countries have already put in mandatory reporting. So Canada is a fast follower. We're not a leader in these things. Yeah. We are a fast follower, 100%. And we need to be part of the global economy. So we don't have a choice in this. That second pillar of the banks, again, they're working with global banks. They're completely tied into the global economy. It's not just the Canadian economy. So when we say that if there's a change of government, provincially, federally in Canada, it'll change all this, it absolutely will not, because both of those first two pillars are looking at this as a global stage, right?
Yeah, that's a little bit a case of like, pick your villain and then blame them for everything. So, which is very dangerous ground at the best.
Exactly.
So when you say mandatory reporting, so I'm sitting here as a small to mid-size service-based company with a team, and I hear mandatory reporting. It's easy to go, they don't mean me. I'm not drilling holes in the ground. I'm not digging out ore. I'm not cutting down trees. I'm not doing any of those things. So why would this affect me? Why would I have to worry about it? Or what I'm hearing is that everyone's going to have to worry about it.
Yeah, and I think what we also look at is when we talk about reporting, especially for the small company, it's going to be more so based on request. My bank's asked for this. I have this at the ready. Here you go. It satisfies things. Business as usual. Your customer is asking for it through supply chain, and we're going to also see this again. We always focus on the emissions. But the reality is, every publicly traded company and every private company at a certain level just sent in their Forced Labor Act last month to prove that they have no child or slave labor in their supply chain. That is going to keep being pressed on companies, where now it's not just what's your policy, but prove that your supply chain doesn't have this in your supply chain. So these things are not going away. And again, when you talk supply chain, that again then trickles down to this. Right, we're back at the coffee shop, right? In every small business.
Talk to me a little bit more about, like, when I think of, again, back to the E, I think of things I can measure. I can measure my methane reduction. I can measure all of these things. And my wife works in oil and gas, so I'm very familiar, and she does a lot of work in this ESG area. So I get to have a lot of kitchen dinner conversations about what she's working on. What about the more qualitative side of things, which maybe live more in the S and the G? Talk to me a little bit about that when it comes to measuring things like diversity, equity, inclusion, like some of the things that are maybe in Alberta specifically, because the E, I think, has always been so important and such a big factor because of the nature of our province. But the S and the G feel to me always a little bit more conceptual, although still very real, but harder to get those maybe firm data points.
100%. And actually, one of the federal legislation that's coming down the pipeline is actually talking about social. And if you have these programs that you're promoting, say, Indigenous engagement, the legislation coming down is, well, now prove that you're actually doing this. Yeah. Can you actually give some quantitative numbers around this?
Make sure it's not just a marketing initiative.
100%, right? Yeah. And that's really what we've seen with ESG, right? In the last 4 years, we've seen it move away from the IR comms team and start to move over to the CFO general counsel team to manage it. And we've really seen this shift. So
now it's your community relations team. It's your HR team. Like, it's really starting to weed through the whole. So if you're going to, for a simple, like, I think the E we've talked about, we've camped out on, most people that would be listening will get it. What falls under the S and the G? Like, could we just throw some buckets in there to make it even easier? Because I'm still always like, someone will say something like, I didn't think about that.
Well, and it is interesting because the S actually has more categories than the E and the G put together.
Okay.
And so you have all of your diversity, equity, inclusion. You have all of your safety. You have all of Indigenous engagement. So when you take just even those three buckets and think of how many different avenues you can go within those, and then the little G, which is funny with governance, because we always say if your G is in order, if you're a well-run company, it should take care of the S and the E. And it is also interesting with the G, nobody thinks about it. And yet when we do stakeholder engagement, so materiality assessment, where we reach out to a company's stakeholders and find out what's most material important to the business, in the top 5, there's always emissions. There's always, in Canada, Indigenous engagement, safety. But one of the ones that pops up in the top 5 almost consistently is cybersecurity. And we go back to supply chain. They do not want you connected into their supply chain if there is a chance that there's going to be a hack via one of their suppliers. And so it comes up all the time, and nobody would attach that to ESG when you talk political rhetoric, right?
Interesting. And it's so prevalent. It's not if you're going to get hacked, it's when, as anyone I know who lives in that space will tell you. And there's been some examples from very large organizations in Alberta that have been hacked in the last year at a very significant level. Mm-hmm. And I know it's kind of been kept hush, but it kind of gets out because we live in a big small town and everybody talks. No one wants to admit they got robbed, but yet the more you admit it, the more the rest of us can learn and then avoid getting robbed, or however you want to break that down, right? So back to reporting and disclosure, right? Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And that's just that good governance, right? Is that piece, if you've got your house in order, and one of those is a cybersecurity policy and a program that's in place that is, locked tight.
So if I think about GreenWorks and I think about my business or anybody who's listening in a leadership role, it's like, oh, geez, like I'm overwhelmed. I'm assuming there's a high degree of consulting that also is involved with, I'm engaged with your team. You come in, you help me navigate it. But now you've also been clear, you've built a software that then is a tool that I can use to organize this, pull it all together, generate my reports, show accuracy, accountability. Just trying to understand a little bit also the model that you run, because there's so much discovery, I think. It sounds like to me that there's so much discovery required to get to the place that I can, quote unquote, in a dream world, automate this.
100%, because we need to be able to work with our clients on a strategy they can actually execute on. And that in that first year especially, we lean very heavily on our expert ESG advisory team to be able to work with clients on that. And because this is also evolving at 100 miles an hour. I was speaking at a conference last month on the waste side of ESG. So all your waste management side of ESG, and talking about regulatory compliance that hasn't changed in 20 years. And yet on the ESG front, with these global frameworks, they're changing what they're asking for and what they're required of almost on a yearly basis. So how do you keep up with all of that? Again, doing it off the side of your desk on some spreadsheets is just not a sufficient way to do it these days.
Are you seeing a lot of companies, like, is there a reality of just like outsourcing this? And like larger companies, are they spinning up teams, or are they going, wow, hey, this isn't maybe a core competency for us yet. Maybe it needs to be. We're going to use outside consultants. Just thinking about the demand, the need, and I'm assuming a lot of companies are approaching this with a different mindset.
Well, and it's really interesting too, is that the evolution of this in the 4 years since I started GreenWorks was even the biggest companies were doing it by committee 4 years ago.
Okay.
And then it evolved to somebody needs to lead this. Somebody needs to be in charge of this. And then they had that designated role a couple of years ago. And then that designated role has now morphed into I've got that leader of our ESG team, and then they're probably getting data from 10 to 20 different people, SMEs around the organization that are feeding in that data. And we met with a company on Friday. There's over 100 people that contribute to that ESG report for them. So that's a massive lift, and so many different people that are communicating different data points and different strategies and different sizes of the organization. Again, how do you manage that with a bunch of spreadsheets bouncing around the organization?
Yes, your biggest competition is spreadsheets. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Are these individuals at the leadership table? Are these directors of chief sustainability officers, a term I hear a lot, the director level, VP level, senior, thinking about all of the different, you can see a lot by what a company values and how much they value it, of what their leadership structure looks like. How's that evolving, or what are you seeing there?
Well, it is really interesting with that too, because the trickiest piece with the way it's structured now is that person that's leading the ESG department now needs to go to the C-suite. The C-suite is looking at this as the ROI is just not there for ESG because it's all risk, no reward. And so that's also one of these pieces as we evolve out of voluntary into mandatory. Mandatory will clean a lot of that up as well, where the C-suite will go, okay, this is what we have to do. Again, same as the financial side, right? It'll become that, and we're going to see that evolve really quickly in 2025.
Well, the simplest, if we can't get capital, if we don't do this, and if we do this, we can get access to capital. That's a pretty, nothing motivates like an external left hook, right?
Absolutely. Access to capital is key.
Yeah. And this is coming tomorrow, not 5 years from now. listen to you talk. Like tomorrow being 2020, March 2025 is tomorrow in my mind. As I get
100%.
older, time goes faster, Demian. I don't know if that is the same phenomenon for you as well. I'm like, March will be here before we know it.
It does seem to be going really fast, especially. But I think that's the thing, right? Is that it's such a great point. To be able to get in front of this is going to take some time. Is going to take the ability to within the team. How are we going to manage this? Who is going to manage this? What tools do we have in place
how,
to help
what,
us?
Where, when, all the things, right?
All those things that need to be looked at. And I think that's the other part, right? Is that the ESG, there's a couple things that are, these are just my personal thoughts. The term ESG is going to go away because it got too politicized too quickly. And it's just become a lightning rod.
Yeah, it gets too many adverse reactions for a simple little acronym, but yes, I hear you.
Absolutely. And it's amazing, right? Because if you go into a company and you go, tell us about your environmental policies or some of your achievements or some of your social things that you're really proud of, they couldn't be quicker to tell you all these great things that they're doing in the organization. Super proud of how we've reduced this on the environmental side, how we're now doing, something on the DEI side. And they're super proud of it right up until you say, so what about ESG? And then they kick you out of the room because there's those.
You learn that lesson as a salesperson pretty quick. You're like, okay, don't that's the landmine. Don't use that. And is it going to? I think it's so many things it's a branding problem to put on my marketing hat. I'm like, it's got some bad heat on. Is this on fire enough? And that's a very bad metaphor to use. I understand that as we think about climate change.
It's a pretty good metaphor, actually.
Yeah. Is it on fire enough that we're finally going to deal with it? Because let's be honest, we have a burning list in all of our roles, and we do the stuff that's burning a little hotter and a little brighter, and we push the other one down the road until it lights on fire. And we all love to think we have a perfectly organized plan, but we all have limited resources. We all have an abundant amount of things we need to do. Is this now, in your mind, getting to a place because of how it's shifting that it's no longer we'll get to this later?
It is absolutely at that stage where in a year from now, nobody's going to be talking about this because it's just going to be matter of fact. Okay. We have to do this as part.
That is super fast. Like a year is very real. In the world of business.
That's the piece of it, right? Is that it's because it's coming from so many different directions and it's coming globally. I think that's this piece of when you talk about the CSA and mandating this for all publicly traded companies, it's just because those companies have to work on a global scale.
Yeah.
The banks, they have to work on a global scale, and it's regardless of our election, regardless of the American election in the fall. Globally, this is all going in one direction. The rhetoric and everything is going to die off as this just gets mandated, and people just go, okay, well, I guess we have to do it. And I can completely appreciate the pushback on it, because again, if you're a CEO of a company and you're looking at this as, this is anything I put out is now creating risk for me. I completely understand.
I love the concept of it's all risk with no reward yet. And so why would I do it? Because I'm opening the kimono for no benefit.
And I mean, that's a huge piece of the way we've built our software. So again, data management, report building, but the third part is assessment. What is gap assessments, but also legal risk assessments.
What do I need? Because data's great, but if I don't know what to do with it, then it's just a pile of data.
And knowing that, are people going to poke holes in it? Is there a flaw in our strategy? Can we even achieve this? You see so many of these situations come up, and that is what's going to be even trickier moving forward, unless again you have a system that allows you to know right away, okay, we're covered, we don't have to worry about this, we can put this out safely, peace of mind, and move on to next year.
And hey, let's be honest, leadership at the federal level, there's been lots of very bold statements, this by 2030 and this by 2050 and this by there's been a lot out there. You're like, whoa, is that even? I appreciate a lightning rod and I appreciate like a moonshot and all that. I've talked to a lot of people that are a lot more educated. And they're like, there wasn't much substance behind that. That was just the thing that was put out there. Like policy versus reality are very different in this space right now. And I think that's super dangerous because it makes the jaded even more jaded. It makes the rest of us 100%. Roll our eyes and go, oh God, another bullshit statement versus no, this is a real thing. And here's the path we're on. Right. But I guess that's the journey any idea goes through as it comes alive.
Well, and honestly, I mean, the funniest part about me running an ESG software company is we could have a whole separate conversation on what is complete BS and what is not. And especially when you talk about it on a political level, I spoke at a conference in November, and I spoke about the amount of anti-ESG lawsuits in the state legislative. There's 39 states in the U.S. that have anti-ESG legislation against it. So you go, oh, that's horrible. But there's also 6 states that have both pro and anti legislation in their state courthouse right now. So it's extra confusing. Wow. And then once you read through the 39 lawsuits, most of it's just they want fiduciary responsibility. They want to be able to make sure that somebody retiring and the retirement plan is focused on the rate of return on the investment versus the social causes or the environmental causes.
Oh, interesting.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
It should be. It should be on the rate. You should get a great return on your investment first and foremost, and everything else is everything else. And if it's a tiebreaker where you're looking at one company to invest in versus another company, and you go, oh, well, I can't. It's a coin flip. Oh, but these guys have a great policies around environmental, around social, and it's a tiebreaker that way. I think that's a pretty good ROI on doing that as well. And it's funny, I heard the tiebreaker comment on an anti-ESG podcast, and I went, oh, that's still a pretty good reason to step up to the plate on these things.
Yeah, if all things considered are equal and this is better, then let's go with this one. Yeah, that's interesting. But what's the mandate, and where are we losing the plot? Back to your point about my retirement fund and how it's being managed. And I want to know that it's being managed with what I care is my best interest in mind. And oh, by the way, I also still care about this other thing too. But let's make sure we get this, and then we have that as the ad. It's always easy to hear like, oh, there's anti. Like, what do you mean? What are they actually against? And most of us don't take the time, because clearly you have to read in and go, what are we actually talking about? And yet we make a life decision based on 140 character or a soundbite. That's a whole other. I think
that's the whole piece, right? Is to ESG to me is just simply, we'd like your transparency on these data points. That's it. And then we want that from every company in every industry in every country. And then you can sit there and then you can make your own judgments or investment decisions or any decision.
Alongside looking at who's the leadership team, what's their financial performance, what's industry standard, like all those things we use as trusted reference points when we make investment decisions. And this is, I love the comparison of this just becomes another grouping with a standardization that anyone technically globally can look at and go, oh, when I look at these two companies, I'm comparing apples to apples, not apples to oranges.
Yeah, I believe I told this anecdotal story when we had coffee, but the one that I use quite a bit, again, being in Alberta, talking to a lot of energy companies, is there was an investigative report a couple of years ago on AWS, Amazon's server farm in Florida. And the idea that just one server farm in Florida takes as much energy as Midtown Manhattan. So it's an enormous amount of energy that it uses, but it's also in Florida because of the lackadaisical laws around businesses using water, because a server farm needs a ton of water to cool it.
For cooling, yeah.
So now, as an Amazon shareholder, I want to know about those stats because, if Florida ever changes the water regulations and makes it more stringent, that's going to affect them. Also, if it's needing that much energy, how is the state of Florida able to do that? And as we increase those server farms, and then you go as a Floridian, I also want to know that as well, because it's my energy, my water. But then you go, the next step of this is GPUs so now as we move to AI and AI server farms, you need GPUs versus CPUs, and GPUs can take as much as 100 times the power as a CPU. So now are we saying that one GPU server farm in Florida is going to take 100 times the power of Midtown Manhattan? And as we ponder this, you go, well, this is all anecdotal because Amazon doesn't actually have to report this today. But wouldn't it be good if they had to report it moving forward and we just had a full lens into everything, and then we can all make a decision on all the information versus some of the information?
Yeah, I think some of the times, though, we might find out things we don't want to know, but that's another story.
It's a whole nother podcast too.
Yeah. It's so easy. I like to attack the energy sector, but no. I want my internet, and I want my computing power, and I want my ChatGPT and all my things, because those are inconvenient truths. I don't want to know those.
Yeah, just not in my backyard.
Yes, I was at Inventures last week, and I attended the one of the sessions on nuclear energy, and it was so powerful and really, really informative. And when you look at the energy future, there's not a future without nuclear that maybe comes anywhere near some of the goals that we've set out, but the not in my backyard. And they had somebody from McMaster University, and we've had an active nuclear reactor on site since the 60s. And you could see the room, and they're like, we polled our students, and 50% didn't know it was there. The other 50% were like, oh, I thought it was turned off. And it was interesting just listening to, she was one of the senior people there, just talking about like how safe it is. It's right in the middle of the campus. They grow tomato plants like outside the front door. And it's been there for 50, 60 years. But you ask anybody, oh, no, it's super dangerous. I don't want to be anywhere near it. Yet I have a classroom right beside it. I just don't know it's there. Not because it's hidden, because I just don't pay attention. It was an interesting dialogue. And New Brunswick and what they're doing from seeing it, I think, as a real economic driver for them, even exporting some of that technology, the Gen 4 reactor technology. So interesting. But things I knew nothing 10 minutes before walking in that room. But I walked out from individuals that were very positive, that have worked in it for 20 years. And, I became educated in an educated way.
It is funny, right? Is of all the industries that have the worst PR, nuclear by far leads because of when you actually pull the stats apart and go, oh, this is the cleanest, safest, and go through the list. There's a great article. I can't remember. I'm trying to think of where I read this, but it was a great article on, is this all the Simpsons' fault? And it's not Chernobyl. It's not actual things that have happened. It's the three-eyed fish and Homer working the safety.
That is so funny. They made a joke. They said, the biggest feedback we get when people come and tour the reactor and they look in and they see that it's blue. They're like, oh, I thought it was going to be green. And they're like, why? Because of the Simpsons. They actually made that joke on the panel. That is so funny that you bring that up.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And there's the Jaws phenomenon. Like you could, if you've watched Jaws and you go swimming in a lake the next day, it crosses your mind.
100%.
And, so much of, we've all watched Chernobyl, and, 60% of Ontario's energy source currently is from nuclear.
Yeah.
Like, and some of the stats around, not to get this camp out on nuclear, but it was just so powerful because I went and just sat through an hour session to be like, oh, I was curious enough to go, but to get educated from people that live and breathe in this stuff every day. And they spent, like, if it was risky, they wouldn't be hanging out at the reactors, right? They wouldn't be doing the thing. And they talked about the medical benefits and, iodine 125 and just so many things that it can be beneficial for. But the second that's, mandatory reporting or some kind of standardization of information, that's the only thing that's going to maybe start paving the road for what I think is going to have to be part of our future, just using nuclear as an example.
No, but I think it comes all the way full circle to, what do people want? They want real, tangible, accurate data, and then make our own decisions. Let's just get the data, full transparency. I want to know all of the information. So it's great. You've given me your financial information. I want to invest in your company. Here's the financial information. But I'd like a lens into all the other things that you're doing. And if there's just a standard baseline that these are things you just have to plug in, it's just going to make everything simpler for everyone. Because that's probably the most common frustration we get is, I just don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. I don't know what is mandatory. I don't know what I don't want to get in trouble. I want this to be accurate. We're getting a terrible rating by the rating agencies. How do we help with that? And let's just standardize it. Then we have accurate data from everyone. And then we can all
and
make
what I'm hearing from you is
decisions.
we're on this journey. Like, it's not that it's not going to happen. It just hasn't happened yet. It's part of the journey of an evolution of any sector or any kind of standardized way of looking at anything. There's a journey, and the journey is often kind of messy, right? Is what I'm also hearing.
It is also, and I'll go back to us when we're doing software demos for companies and for banks, which is very interesting. When we do one for a bank, their pain points to build their ESG reports are the same as, it's really interesting actually, that doesn't matter what industry, whether you're a bank putting out an ESG report, an oil and gas company, construction company, agriculture, they all have the same pain points in terms of moving away from a spreadsheet to a software solution. But then what's interesting is when we talk to the banks, it is matter of fact. This is what we're doing today. This is what's happening next year. This is what's happening in Europe. There's no wiggle room on if this happens or maybe this will happen. It is absolutely a checklist of this is what we need to worry about today. And then next year, we're going to be worrying about this. And so when you see it from them, it just cleans this, the confusion up about what's happening next. But
what I'm also hearing, if you're listening to this, let's clarify, this isn't going away. This isn't getting less. It's going to be actually more clear, but also more regulated. So for anyone who's not thinking about this as the reality of the future, that's just not true. Like this is a reality, and it's only going to become more so. And that's what I took away even from the coffee chat you and I had. Like, get close to this, get comfortable, get an understanding, because it is happening. It's not a fad.
It's not a fad. No, yeah. It is definitely, and again, it's global. because you think about what would have to happen to undo all of this.
Yeah.
It has to be undone at a global level. And no matter how wishful you are that you hope this just went all away, how can that possibly happen? Especially, again, as we keep progressing and more, Gen Zs, I guess, coming into the voting age. As you get more and more young people voting, you're clearly going to have more of the climate, social causes, all this pushed into.
Which is part of how society changes every time, and it's always been. There's always been some goddamn young person with some harebrained schemes. If you and I were those people too, like that is the journey that we go on, and we all think that it's new and it's the first time it's happened. If you look back at some of the major shifts, even the last 100 years, you can pick out it's always been just a changing of the guard, right?
100%.
Yeah.
And so, that's another way to go. There's no way this is going back and getting unraveled.
There's nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come. I can't remember. I think that's an old Wayne Dyer quote from way back in my reading Buddhism days. But I do really like that because you can't put the genie's not going back in the bottle.
Yeah. And now it just becomes that compromise and working together and collaborating, because the other piece to it again is it's coming quick, but what we do hope when we see some of these mandatory reporting frameworks coming through is give companies a little bit of time to get their ducks in order and do it in stages. Don't throw it all at them at once. We're going to do a staged approach. This is stage one, and here's a few things you need to do. And then we're going to next year it's going to be added a few more things and a few more things. But it can't be all at once. So that's our hope.
We can't have all stick either. You got to have a little bit of carrot too, right?
100%. And I think that is the piece. Again, if we just go back to even the tiebreaker, if you're debating between two and one, you feel really good about it. And I mean, this is really where this all came from 5 to 10 years ago. Was young investors coming into and going, I want to invest. I obviously want a great rate of return on this investment. The cash is still king, but I'd also like to feel good about this investment. And it's not really a horrible thing when you kind of look at it that way.
And it's that belief that I want it all. We can have both. I don't want to compromise one for the other. And to your point about a different generation, there's not a willingness to compromise. And like, this isn't, I want return at all costs. Yeah, I want that. And I want this as well. And I'm willing to look at that. Exactly. But you're right. The dollar is still king. And let's not you can have all
it should be.
You can have all the hugs and kumbaya you want. That's still going to drive. What I'm hearing you say is this is becoming more intertwined, and they are part and parcel to each other going forward more than ever. And we're talking about the next 2 to 3 years.
And it is it's both the feel good part, but again, going back to the Amazon or the AWS server example, we need, as shareholders, you need to know how much power that server farm is taking in Florida and how much water it's taking, and what is the plan if we can't pull that much power and that much water? So in terms of a financial ramification to that, even though they're environmentals and people look at it as environmental, there is a financial impact as well. And so we have to take that into consideration as well.
Curious for you guys, on this journey, building this organization, kind of what are some of your challenges? Is it staffing? Is it funding? Is it you're still kind of early and companies are still looking at you kind of squinting out of one eye? Like what's the journey been like for you from an adoption and growth? And building a company doesn't happen by accident, Demian, well, as you and I both know.
I think the challenges of being a SaaS startup would mirror anyone that you
would ring true before. Across the board. Yeah. Okay. Right.
Yeah. There's very few things when I'm listening to other podcasts from other founders that I'm like, oh, that's exactly. Oh yeah, we face.
Well,
that.
which can be reassuring to go, you're not alone, or maybe not completely losing your mind. That other people are also losing their mind in the same way.
Once in a while, I think I'm definitely losing my mind. But
I think that's as long as it's a healthy balance.
100%. But specific to doing this within ESG, it has been a really interesting journey just watching this evolve. Again, when I started this, I didn't know anything about ESG. So I was coming in blind, and I would just go to every conference, every podcast, anything I could.
Was that actually an advantage? Because you were like, you didn't know what you didn't know, so you went to learn everything?
I think
sometimes if we knew what we know now, we wouldn't do that. There's so many of those jokes about that, right?
Oh, 100%. But I think the biggest advantage I have is the fact that I didn't come into it with that lens that this is perfect and this. I came into it as how can we make anyone understand this? Because it's so complicated.
Yeah.
And it is interesting because I always tell everyone, 4 years ago, there was always some presenter at every conference I went to that would at some point say, if you're in a rowboat in the middle of the ocean, just start rowing. And that was their idea of get going. And I'm like, that's the dumbest advice I have ever heard, because you have no idea if you're going to land, if you're just going around in circles. Like, first and foremost, you have to figure out where you're going.
Look for a sign. Which way is the wind blowing? Is there a bird? Yeah,
and
totally.
Then
Yeah,
you
that's
start,
so funny.
don't paddle at all until you know exactly which direction you're going in. And that's part of the overwhelming piece, is that we just have all these companies rowing around in the middle of the ocean trying to get somewhere, and they're spinning their wheels.
If you ever been in a rowboat, unless you have a destination, you always end up going in a circle every time.
100%.
Every time.
And so we've got to get them going in the right direction. It's not that overwhelming. It's not that daunting. Once you realize, I just have to focus on this. Oh, well, why don't you just tell me that at the beginning?
eat the elephant one bite at a time, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
And for you, how has it been just getting access to talent? Is it local talent? Is it global talent? Are you getting people from everywhere? What's the acquisition strategy look like? And how has that been a limiting factor at all, getting people?
Our strategy on building the company has really been staying local, staying in Calgary. And a lot of that is most of our original clients, and still about 80% of our clients are oil and gas, because that's my background.
Yep, of course. So that's where your Rolodex was, those individuals, right? Obviously.
100%. And then, also within that, looking at the challenges that industry is facing, we really needed not only the product to work for those specific pain points, but we needed our advisory team to be able to come in and talk to them specifically about what it is to be a producer, what it is to be a midstream, what it is to be a service company, and work within that industry. And that's really key, because when we look at it and we go, we lost, we had a quote, and we lost it to a company out of New York. Well, this company out of New York doesn't know anything about the Canadian oil and gas industry and how to help on all those little nuances to get them going on ESG. So we really did look at, focusing on the talent on local. And I'm going to take a second to do my little rant on Calgary startups, just in general.
Okay, please do. The soapbox is yours, sir.
I have talked everybody's ear off at the Chamber of Commerce, at Economic Development Calgary, at the mayor. The reality is, we keep talking as Calgary as that we have this tech boom, and how amazing this tech boom is. And then they highlight 2 or 3 unicorn type companies and talk about them. But the interesting part is, every single one of these companies in Calgary, what they need more than anything else is customers in Calgary. Because the reality is, if you're in Calgary and you need a plumber, you're going to call a Calgary plumber. The Calgary plumbers aren't competing with Argentina plumbers. But as a Calgary software company, somebody needs an ESG software, they're looking globally and we're competing on a global market. We're also competing on a global market for staff, because any one of my developers could work remote for any company. Yep. Same with my client success. They can work for any side. So we're competing on a talent level globally. We're competing for customers globally. And the city of Calgary and Alberta and Canada, what about creating something that, if you're looking for, you've met with tons of them. There's so many great startups, not just in ESG, but
getting that first customer, like what are we doing 100%. Even as with all these incubators, it falls off to that cliff of that chasm of despair when it comes to that first customer. We're going to incubate, but how come our city you're not the only one who's brought that up multiple times.
I mean, again, I'm sure you've heard the same story, is that you go to a tech networking event in Calgary and you go, who is your first customer? Who is that first adopter? It's never a Calgary company. It's very rarely a Canadian company. It's usually they went to the States or to Europe to get those.
Some of our biggest success stories don't even have clients in Canada. Like
exactly.
Like some of those unicorn stories, and there's companies, and the companies that are sometimes doing the best in Alberta are so under the radar because they don't have any customers here. I've had lots of conversations like that. Lots more than I would have liked.
Well, and that's all. And so the funny part is, I'm more complaining about this for my fellow founders.
Yep.
Whereas we have most of our customers in Calgary. And again, because we can go right into their office, 2 blocks down from our office, downtown Calgary.
And your background has an impact, like who you know, the relationships you have, the doors you can open. That's huge. Like that it's not just who you know, it's how you know them kind of thing. And you obviously, you had trusted relationships, and that is gold, no matter what you're doing.
Well, and then again, that part where we genuinely want to help them, we want to help reduce this cost, the pain point, just the stress of all of this. If we can help, and if we can sit in their office and talk to them about it, that's always the best way to do it versus a Teams meeting, a Zoom meeting across the world.
The oil and gas, this is still an in-person industry for sure. Like no
Absolutely.
question. Yeah, my wife was back to the office very, very quickly on during the COVID journey. There was not even a negotiable. Their leadership team was like, well, we just gotta. They were to merger and a bunch of things. But Damian, I appreciate the journey. It gives me hope from the perspective of like, if you give me the rules, then I know how to play the game. But if the rules are always changing and it depends which rule book I use and I don't know where to go, like that's the most frustrating thing as a leader. So what do you usually do is you kind of park it because there's so many unknowns in the world of running any kind of an organization. I'm going to go where there's something that, okay, I have to do this and it's consistent. And I know what it's going to be. Okay, I'll do that because it feels less risky. I think that I love what you said. This isn't going away. So therefore, let's get better at it. let's be more fair to all of us on being like, this is where the guardrails are. This is where the goalposts are. You're already collecting the data. Here's how to actually get it to line up in a way that actually will reward you and not just run the risk of transparency and being punished. If it's not going away, which I don't think it should, that is the only next viable alternative, in my opinion.
Yeah. And then our hope again is that those goalposts are cemented in and everyone is kicking towards the same goalpost and they know exactly where they're going to be.
Yeah, you don't move the football field around because once you cement that, or a soccer field, once you put your goalpost in the ground, it kind of stays there literally forever.
Exactly.
And that gives you a lot more because you know where to show up to play the game. So anyways, enough of my sport. We went down this weird sports metaphor road at the end.
I love a good sports metaphor. It's actually surprising that it took us that long to get there.
What's the best? Obviously, GreenWorks ESG, GWESG.com is your website. Obviously, you're on LinkedIn, so you got a bunch of followers. Would lead me to believe that LinkedIn is a powerful platform for you. What's your favorite way for people to get a hold of you?
I mean, I'm old school. Email
still works.
It is
still
funny.
Works.
I got told off by my staff earlier last week that why are we still using this old fashioned email thing? And I'm like, because I really like this old fashioned email thing.
I will tell you though, from a personal experience, not saying you should, but when we moved to Slack and Asana, oh my God, my email went to nothing. All team communications are in there, and it's funny, myself and my business partner were the biggest holdouts. Two old dudes not doing it. We're not even that old, but I'm making the joke.
Yeah.
My life did get better when I switched over to Slack and stopped relying. Certainly for internal, it did get a lot better. So I'm going to back your staff on that one. They can give me high fives like, thank you, Tyler, for telling him that.
Yeah, I'll let them know that.
Sorry,
it's universal.
Because I had to preach to myself to get out of my own way on that one as well. So that's why I'm laughing. So what's your email? Throw it out there.
So it's my first name, but it's spelled weird to everyone except for my mom. So it's Demian, but it's spelled Demian.
Not Demian, but yes. Again, I'm glad you clarified that earlier.
Yeah. Demian.Newman.
I love it. And everyone except your mom.
ESG.
Fantastic. And obviously LinkedIn, and go check out your website. You guys got some good information out there. And you're speaking at a conference. I know this is going to be old news now, but you're speaking at a conference today. What are you up to today?
Yeah, so I'm speaking at the Canadian Association of Insurance reciprocals, and we're chatting about ESG risk and kind of everything we just talked about. What is the risk and how to mitigate it, because it seems incredibly daunting when you look at there's over 5,000 greenwashing lawsuits globally right now, or I think it's way more than 5,000 now. But how do you just navigate that? And there's some really easy steps. Again, eat the whale. What is it? Eat the whale one bite at a time.
Yeah, or the elephant. You can pick whatever animal you want. I think both are completely socially unacceptable to use it in a joke. No one should be eating elephants or whales. We should not do either of those. But I think it holds true. And I think when you see the banks where they're headed, you see insurance companies where they're headed. All that lets us know is that's what's coming to us as individuals and business owners and homeowners and property owners down the road. Like that. That's the canary. Like if they're getting on board, it's going to be. You're not going to have a choice, right?
100%. And we just need to make this as inexpensive and as pain-free as possible, and just take away, again, really, how do we remove the risk?
And possibly even a little bit rewarding. Might be also nice.
Very, very much.
Damian, thanks for coming on the show. Good luck on your talk today. And I have a feeling you and I will be talking again. This story is not done. This chapter is not finished.
Absolutely. No, great talking to you, Tyler.
Thanks,
really
my friend.
Appreciate it.